I came home later than usual, the hallway light buzzing faintly above the door. The apartment smelled faintly of metal and dust, as though the air itself had absorbed the wiring's hum. I dropped my keys onto the counter and padded toward the living room, tired and ready to collapse on the couch. The TV was on. I didn't remember turning it on. The screen flickered weakly, gray-blue light spilling across the worn carpet. I reached for the remote on the coffee table. Empty. I checked the cushions, the side table, the small shelf where I sometimes tossed it in a rush. Nothing. A faint static hum rose from the speakers. The channel had changed. I hadn't touched anything. The screen displayed a cooking show, the host's movements slightly jerky, the colors muted, too saturated in places. The next blink, the channel switched to a nighttime news broadcast. Anchors stared at the camera, their mouths moving silently for a moment, then audible speech, words that I almost understood, though nothing made sense. I blinked. The remote was still missing. I stood, pacing. The hum filled the corners of the room. The TV switched again. A late-night talk show, audience clapping, laughter echoing too loud, then fading into silence between the claps. Each channel lasted only a few seconds. I wanted to leave it alone. I wanted to step back, turn on a lamp, read, ignore the trembling light. But the screen had my attention. I felt it like a gaze. The remote had to be here. I never lost things. I opened the drawers, still nothing. My hand lingered on the empty space where it should have been. Another shift. The channel changed. The screen showed the corner of my bedroom, shot from above, from the angle of the ceiling. I froze. I live alone. I pressed my hand to the carpet, trying to slow my pulse. Static crackled at the edges of the picture, soft at first, then rising in pitch. I leaned closer. In the corner of the screen, a shadow moved. Not mine. It mirrored me. Standing, hesitant, reaching, but off, distorted, the gestures slightly delayed. I turned toward the living room window. The street was empty, the blinds shut. No one. Another shift. The screen went black for a heartbeat, then a feed of the kitchen. The fridge light was on. My hand twitched, almost reaching for the knob. The hum deepened, as though it was aware. The fridge door swung open, slowly, impossibly, as though my hesitation had delayed it. I swallowed. The channels continued cycling. Old shows I had never watched. Static-filled films, black-and-white sitcoms, an endless loop of home shopping ads, each selling the same product. A small, unmarked box. One ad lingered longer than the others. The announcer's smile was too wide, too knowing, and when he spoke, his eyes seemed to lock onto mine through the screen. Couldn't look away. The remote, or my expectation of it, haunted me. Every surface searched, every cushion overturned. It was nowhere, and yet the TV responded. When I stepped closer, the images softened, as if inviting me in. Step back, they flickered violently, threatening. A commercial ended. The screen went gray, then a single line of text. Hello. I blinked. Nothing else. I whispered, "Who's there?" The static hummed, and then the channel shifted. My apartment appeared on the screen again. My couch, my coffee table, but now I was lying there, on the floor, not in reality, in the broadcast, my head tilted in a strange, unnatural way. The hum rose to a low vibration, pressing against my eardrums. I moved toward the TV. Step by step, the channels flickered faster. The sound distorted. My reflection appeared between the flickers. My face, pale, eyes wide, framed by the flickering light of the set. But my reflection smiled. I stopped. Another shift. A bedroom I didn't recognize. The bed was neatly made. A figure sat on it. Blank, featureless. And yet, I felt it watching me. My pulse surged. The figure lifted a hand and pointed directly at me. The remote clicked in my mind. I imagined pressing buttons. Nothing. The channels shifted, obeying a pattern I didn't understand, each frame longer, each image closer to my own apartment, to me. I leaned against the wall, breathing shallow. The TV whispered, though no words left the speakers. Instead, Images flickered. My past, my apartment's construction, the street outside, the pattern of my light switches, my shadow as it fell over the carpet. All known, all intimate, all collected without me realizing. I tried to leave the room. My foot caught the edge of the rug. A channel flicked to my hallway. My hand was reaching out for the door, exactly as I had done, but the screen showed me hesitating. My own hesitation was mirrored, slowed, amplified. The hum grew quieter, almost contemplative. I stopped moving. The screen pulsed, blue and gray. One channel held. A close-up of the living room. The coffee table, my hand hovering over where the remote should be. The pulse of the screen matched my heartbeat. It was waiting. I whispered again. Stop. The channel shifted. My bedroom appeared. The bed was empty. My reflection smiled from the corner of the screen, eyes too aware. Then a subtle detail. The remote, lying on the floor next to the bed. Not mine. Small, black buttons worn, but the outline was wrong, elongated, as though stretched by the light of the screen. I bent down. Nothing there. Another shift. The TV showed me sitting on the couch. Frozen. I was staring at the screen. My pulse quickened. The hum was gone. The silence thickened. Then, in the corner of the screen, text again. Do you see now? I didn't answer. The channels rotated once more. My apartment, my reflection, the small black remote in impossible angles. I felt it studying me, waiting for recognition. I felt it learning, recording, adapting. I realized I had been an observer and the observed simultaneously. The screen flickered, paused, and then, without a transition, the screen went entirely black. A final pulse of gray-blue light illuminated the room. It lingered, as though hesitant to leave, and in that light, I saw my own eyes, wide, unblinking, reflected in the glass of the TV. Not just reflected, responding, waiting, communicating. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And I understood that the TV had stopped broadcasting long ago. It was speaking. Her coat was hanging by the door. I paused mid-step, the weight of the grocery bag in my hand heavier than it should have been. The hallway was dim, the single bulb overhead flickering once, twice, then steadying, as if unsure whether to stay alive. I hadn't worn that coat in weeks. Winter had softened into the restless humidity of early spring, and the thick wool had been shoved into the back of the closet, folded meticulously on the bottom shelf. Yet here it was, a familiar outline against the pale wall, a dark shape that hadn't belonged in days. I set the bag down slowly, my fingers brushing the strap of the tote with a careful, deliberate slowness that felt necessary. The air smelled faintly of the city outside, smog and rain-damp concrete, but there was something else layered beneath it. A faint musk, wool and something softer, a trace of her perfume. I hadn't noticed it at first, not consciously, but now it pressed against the edges of the hallway, subtle as static in the ear. I stepped closer, and the coat moved slightly. Not with the draft. I had checked the windows earlier, locked tight, but a gentle shiver along the shoulder, like it was settling into place, waiting. The collar was curled just so, the buttons facing outward, neat and precise. And for a second, just a breath, I thought I could see the faint shape of her hand brushing the sleeve before it fell limp again. I shook my head. Of course, that was impossible. She wasn't here. She hadn't been here. Weeks and weeks of absence. And yet the apartment retained traces of her. A cup on the counter she'd left unwashed. The faint indentation of her pillow in the bed. Memory has a way of warping the familiar, though, and I told myself that's all this was. A trick of recollection, a momentary glitch. The coat felt warmer than the air. I reached out. My fingers brushed the fabric. A thick wool, rough along the exterior, soft and almost bristly under the lining. It was like touching an echo of her. The hallway seemed to contract as I lingered. The dim light pooled around the coat, shadows stretching into corners, darkening the threshold to the kitchen, where the fridge hummed low and unevenly. I could feel the apartment breathing with me, or perhaps against me. I retraced my steps, careful to keep my eyes from darting to the coat. I needed to unpack, to ground myself in something ordinary. Jars, cans, the familiar ritual of setting things in place. But every time I turned, the coat was there, always there. The buttons glinted faintly in the flickering light. Sometimes I swore the sleeves had shifted, the hem brushing against the floor where it hadn't before. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. I sat on the edge of the couch, the groceries half unpacked at my feet. The apartment was quiet except for the fridge and the faint hum of the radiator. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that coats do not move themselves, that memory can betray you. I reached for my phone to check the time, but the screen illuminated the room in a way that made the shadows around the coat seem longer, more deliberate. I hadn't noticed before, but the buttons seemed polished, the wool compressed in a way that suggested recent handling. I pressed my palm to the fabric again, just the hem this time. The fibers were soft, pliant, as if recently smoothed. Not a week old, not weeks untouched. I blinked. There was a faint creak. The hinge of the door, perhaps, though I had locked it twice this morning. The coat shifted again, subtly, almost like a small nod, and my chest tightened. My pulse thumped lightly, drowned beneath the deep silence. I hadn't realized how cold the apartment had become until I felt it radiate from the coat, an ambient chill that crawled along my wrist and into my sleeve. I stood. I approached, slower this time, each step deliberate. The coat remained perfectly still until I was close enough to see the tiny indentation of a shoulder pressed faintly into the fabric. Not my own. I stepped back. The impression was gone, replaced by an impossible smoothness, like the coat had been folded and refolded by unseen hands. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to regulate my breathing. I told myself the rational explanations. A draft, gravity, the uneven floorboards. But then came the scent again, soft, familiar, hers, and the faint, almost imperceptible weight of presence, as if the coat had eyes tucked into its folds. I felt compelled, though I did not understand why, to touch it one more time. My hand moved slowly along the shoulder, over the fabric that should have been inert, and something almost imperceptible shivered beneath my fingertips. A whisper, perhaps, or the brushing of wool against wool. I pulled back sharply. Nothing moved. The coat hung ordinary again. I turned away, pacing the small living room, trying to hear the normal sounds of the apartment. The refrigerator, the radiator, the occasional distant car. But the apartment was holding its breath. The light flickered again, slow and deliberate, pooling around the coat like a spotlight on a stage. And then I noticed. The hem was brushing the floor. It had been hovering before. The sleeve shifted slightly, as if someone had rolled it back, a casual human gesture. I froze. A memory surfaced, unbidden. I had left it in the closet, folded neatly, stacked with scarves and gloves. Weeks ago, I had seen it there. I had not left it by the door. And yet, here it was, ready for me, waiting, as though it had known I would return. The coat smelled faintly of rain and her perfume, the fibers warm, pliant. The apartment was quiet in that peculiar way that feels like listening through water. Every sound muffled, every shadow exaggerated. I realized then that I could feel its attention, patient and calm, observing. It was not merely an object displaced. It was anticipating, responding. I stepped back and let the light fall fully on it. Every detail. The buttons, the seams, the soft, subtle curve of the collar. Everything familiar, yet altered, intimate in a way that pressed against the edges of my mind. I thought of touching it again. I wanted to, though I didn't understand why. And as my gaze lingered, I felt a slight motion at the hem, an imperceptible shift, like the coat had exhaled. I blinked, and the hallway seemed to stretch, the shadows reaching out as if to meet the coat, as if waiting for my decision. The chill pressed harder, a weight that was neither wind nor draft, but intent. I realized that the coat was not returned by accident, not misplaced. It had come back to me, arranged perfectly, aware of me, the air around it charged with the quiet insistence of presence. I stepped closer. The wool was soft against my fingertips again. The fabric moved ever so slightly, responsive, almost sentient. I could feel the faint pressure of shoulders settling into place that weren't mine, and the faint warmth of what might have been hers, or something else entirely. I did not move my hand away this time. I watched the collar curl imperceptibly, the buttons catching the light. The sleeve twitched. My breath caught. I felt the presence pressing against my own memory, brushing away certainty. The apartment held its quiet, watching, and I realized I had never been alone. Her coat was hanging by the door, and it had waited for me.